My name is Rachel Springer. I'm doing a junior division individual performance on leadership and legacy and social reform. Dorothea Dix in her Massachusetts memorial. So we have to clean out this dirty room? Oh well, what can you expect from a 115-year-old hospital? Seriously though, this is 1990. The room looks like it hasn't been cleaned out since 1890. A nurse, not a maid. You know, I heard this was one of the psychiatric hospitals Dorothea Dix created in the 1800s. I remember a bit about her from school. You know, in 1843, social reform leader Dorothea Dix had her memorial, a revelation that outlined the poor conditions and treatment of the mentally ill, presented to the Massachusetts legislature. As a result of her leadership, plans were set up for more public asylums in Massachusetts, and hundreds of copies of her memorial were distributed across the country. It left a legacy of ensuring shelter and medical care being provided to those with mental illnesses, yada, yada, yada. But you know, if you think about it, Dorothea Dix grew up in a time of a lot of social reform, the 1820s and 30s. There was the women's rights movement, the child labor movement, the education and reform movement, and many more. But instead of joining one of these movements, Dorothea Dix used her leadership skills in standing up for a cause that was not often talked about at that time to make sure that people with mental illnesses received adequate care. Isn't this for lobotomy? Gives me the creeps. Imagine having these tools drilled into your head, depersonalizing you. I remember when they finally stopped doing that, thank goodness, because they had found safer procedures. Come to think of it, why did Dorothea Dix even want these places if they did such horrible things? A transcript of Dorothea Dix's speech from the expansion of the Worcester State Hospital. Maybe this can help. Hello, and thank you for inviting me to the expansion of the Worcester State Hospital. I am excited to announce that there has been an expansion of 200 more beds. Each of these beds is another insane person who won't be beaten on a daily basis while in these jails, almshouses, and prisons. I will remind you of how this all began. I was a young teacher when I was invited to teach Sunday school at a women's prison. One day, after I completed my teachings, I asked the jailer to give me a tour. Yet on the tour, I noticed that some insane persons who had done nothing wrong faced worse conditions than the criminals housed there who committed crimes. And they were kept in these places only because their communities had nowhere else to put them. When I asked the jailer why they had no stoves to keep them warm at night, he simply said, "Mad people don't need stoves, ma'am." Of course, I immediately presented my findings to court, and soon after, the mentally ill at the East Cambridge jail received stoves. Yet I was still interested in continuing this work with improving the conditions of the feeble-minded, so I began saving money from sales of my latest popular children's encyclopedia, Conversations on Common Things. Once I had gathered enough money and resources, I began traveling across the state of Massachusetts, visiting every jail, barn, almshouse, asylum, prison, any nook or cranny where an insane person is housed, taking very extensive notes. I met insane men and women who were beaten on a daily basis until they were bleeding, bruised, and even permanently injured. I met a man who had been auctioned off for labor, like a slave, and was kept in such horrible conditions that when I met him, he was covered in a half-inch of frost. And then there was this man. When I met him, he had been kept in a cage for 30 years. After a year and a half of constantly traveling, I compiled all of my notes into a 32-paged memorial to the legislature of Massachusetts, protesting against the confinement of idiots and insane persons in almshouses and prisons. Mr. Stanley Greeley Howe presented the memorial before the Massachusetts legislature in Cambridge Court in January of 1843. And despite many foolish reporters and officials denying the facts, calling my report untrue or misleading simply because they didn't want it to be true, after several weeks in standing up for my leadership, and standing up for this important, ignored cause as just a middle-aged woman, A bill was passed, granting the state mental hospitals significantly more funding and allowing for this expansion of 200 more beds. In addition to that, plans were set up for numerous more mental hospitals across the state of Massachusetts, and hundreds of copies of my memorial were distributed across the country. It turned out that it wasn't that the public didn't care what was happening to insane persons. It was that the information wasn't getting out there. So while hundreds of women gathered to merely talk about their rights at the Seneca Falls Convention, I went out and took a stand for what I believed in. And I realized I was quite blunt about the facts that I presented, but I felt it rightfully deserved, and I did give fair warning. I said, I tell what I have seen, painful and shocking as the details are. So instead of hiding the facts, I put them out there using phrases such as insane persons confined within this commonwealth, in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience. Because that is what I saw. Before I began, there were 5,172 insane persons in public care, yet only 2,500 beds. We can only wonder what happened to the remaining 2,672, the majority. The memorial and its availability of clothing, food, and most importantly, shelter and medical care being provided to insane persons who need it. It opens the public's eyes to what was going on, and you, in turn, have pushed our governments to create asylums which provide insane persons with these necessities. This has inspired me to travel to other states. In fact, I recently visited New Jersey, where my memorial's legacy was continued. There, a new mental hospital is being built to aid the well-being of insane persons. But although we have made a step here, not every place has moved insane persons out of jails, almshouses, and prisons, and into asylums and mental hospitals. I ask you to join me, to fight against these horrors which insane persons face each and every day. As I concluded my memorial, a voice, strong and deep, comes up from every almshouse and prison where the insane are or have been, protesting against such evils. I get it now. So although these asylums are horrible, it was a step up from where they used to be, when they were stuck in these jails, almshouses, and prisons. If I remember right, Dorothea spent a long time traveling across the country to end that. Before she began, there were, 14 mental hospitals in the U.S.? And by the time she completed her work, she alone had aided in the completion of 32 mental hospitals, 15 schools for the feeble-minded, and a school for the blind. And although a whole bunch of them were closed down recently, I guess this is kind of her legacy too, because we're allowing people with mental illnesses to have more choices in things like where they live. And now they have antipsychotic drugs and advanced treatment plans, so they can do this without having to worry about things. Speaking of treatment plans, I remember in my nurse training, the doctor was talking about the ACT, Assertive Community Treatment Program. Gives each patient a team of psychiatrists, nurses, social workers, and substance abuse counselors that all work together to form the best treatment plan for their patient. And this is a treatment plan that works around their patient 24/7 as opposed to what it used to be, once or twice a week. I guess this is Dorothea Dix's legacy too, because we're allowing people with mental illnesses to receive treatment wherever they are, whenever it is. And yes, after we finish closing down these mental hospitals, a few of them will end up back in jails or prisons. This is expected. But the thing is, nowadays, they're required by law to give treatment to people with mental illnesses. In fact, I'm getting a job as a mental health nurse after this. Just can't get away from the profession. Anyways, most of them will end up back with their family and friends, instead of the dehumanizing conditions of asylums. It's really ironic, really. Through her leadership, Dorothea began the work of ending the horrible treatment of people with mental illnesses by creating mental hospitals so that they could receive treatment and adequate care. And now, through her legacy, we are finishing a work by, of all things, tearing down these mental hospitals so that they can live wherever they want and have more freedoms. Well, the shift is over now. Really, it's remarkable how a woman of her time and age possessed so much leadership while writing this revolutionary memorial, and how the memorial could have a legacy that's lasted over a century and is still evolving today. See you tomorrow.